Welcome to Easily Entertained, a show dedicated to appreciating all the best parts of entertainment. My name's Bryson Olson, and I'm a filmmaker and a lover of all forms of storytelling. Here I will bring you along as we critique and analyze stories with a more positive take on why we enjoy them and bring a new appreciation to the world of entertainment. Welcome back to Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson Olson, here to talk about all things entertainment. Today, we are going to be talking about Coraline, probably one of my favorite movies. It is such a good one. I absolutely love it. The stop motion still holds up, I would say. The story is fun, and you kind of got that fun little horror aspects to everything, and I think that is awesome. And I even recently read the book for it as well, which, you know, as most adaptations go, is before the movie, and it was wonderful. It was a good book. They're both kind of good on their own, and we'll be talking about that later in the episode. We're also going to be talking about, you know, how they managed to adapt things, you know, why they chose to put it in stop motion, as well as some interesting changes they made to the story as well to, you know, make it bit best for the screen, which is kind of a hard thing to do. So let's get into it. First, why they chose to do it in stop motion. I don't know exactly the reason why they chose to put it in stop motion, but from my guess and just kind of the way animation works and, you know, movie adaptations work, I just think it was probably the best fit for this kind of story. Like I said, and, you know, if you've seen Coraline, you kind of already know, there are some horror aspects to Coraline. It is meant to be kind of suspenseful, a little bit scary, especially to like a child at some point. And, you know, we love that aspect of Coraline. And to really capture that effect, one, live action, I think possibly could have been too scary, because it is kind of like, it's not a children's book, but it's like a young adult type book. And, you know, if you put it in live action, some aspects of it, while like they're not like cussing it and everything, the horror is definitely there. And so I don't think it would be rated R, but it'd be PG-13, and that wouldn't let them really hit their audience as much as they would really want to with, you know, a live action adaptation. And animation, there are tons of different styles of animation. I don't think 2D or, you know, CGI animation would have really hit it all that great, but I think stop motion does. And the reason I think it does is, think about other stop motion adaptations. You have The Nightmare Before Christmas, Paranorman, you have Wallace and Gromit. While even though some of them are pretty charming, on its own, stop motion is kind of like almost an unnerving type of animation to a lot of people. When I was a kid, stop motion freaked me out. Like Rudolph, the classic stop motion animated movie, The Abominable Snowman scared the ever-living crap out of me. And so, you know, I was kind of already associating stop motion with some uneasiness. I was not really a fan of it for a long time, and now I'm a huge fan of stop motion because I love it, and I think the art craft is just really cool. And with that, though, I do think a lot of people have similar associations with stop motion. And so if you're going to make a story that's kind of uneasy, you're putting a child in a bit of an unnerving type situation, stop motion is probably going to be the way to do it. I think it's a good way to, you know, kind of hit the animation aspect so you can kind of get away with a little bit more things. If you've ever noticed in animated shows and movies, studios can kind of get away with some darker aspects to it because it's animated. It often gets a lower rating because they're not showing actual people. And that, I feel like, kind of plays well with the story of Coraline. And along with that, because you're trying to make things a bit scarier, it gives actual physical representations of the horror aspects to it. You know, the beldam, the bugs, the wonders. It actually gives physical aspects to it, doing it in stop motion. Whether you're doing it in CGI or in 2D, while those are both great mediums, you can very quickly associate that they're fake because there's not a lot of depth to them. There is depth in 3D animation, but also like it's usually a bit more cartoony. It's not as true to life. And while stop motion is obviously fake, but with stop motion, because you can actually tell that something has been physically made, you do have that more like tangible type of suspense when it comes to Coraline, because you can see that it's physical. It's not drawn. It's not made by computer. It's actually physical. And I think that adds to the horror aspect of everything. And I think that's why they do really well adapting it over to stop motion rather than some other type of animation or to live action. And let's also talk about the changes they made from the book to the movie. Every medium, if you're going to adapt it to like a movie or a TV show, you do have to make some changes to make it fit better or to just tell a different kind of story and, use everything to your advantage. And I think in the case of Coraline, I like the changes that they added. A big one that if you're reading the book and you haven't read it before, but you've seen the movie, there are a couple things that don't exist in the book, such as Wybie, the doll, and the wonders, the My Circus, the big garden. They aren't really existent in the book version of Coraline, but they add them in the movie to add different aspects to things. Wybie, for example, so in the book, Coraline has a lot of her own inner dialogue. She thinks about things a lot of the time, and to kind of explain the world, she talks about like how she was explained how the world is. Whereas that doesn't always work in a movie sense because one, an inner monologue is going to sound pretty cringe half the time unless it's very, very important to the story, like someone's kind of losing their mind. That is a very important way to give someone an inner monologue, but that's not really the case for Coraline. And with this story, they use Wybie for that a lot of the time. He explains the flat that they're living in and like it's sectioned off, the well that she goes and sees that's, kind of foreshadowing on going to be needing later. And he also serves as a way to kind of propel the story forward a little bit. And that's from him finding the doll. And the doll, like I said, is also non-existent in the books. But they put it in the film for a good reason. Because in the book, like when Coraline discovers the other world for the first time, it's very much like her own, but there's no, they don't really go into why. They're like, it's kind of just like, oh, the Belknap knows. But in a movie aspect, when, you can't really just take that at face value and be like, okay, you have to figure out why they've been that way. And so the doll represents that. The doll represents how the other mother finds all these things out about Coraline and creates this magical, over the top world that is supposed to entice her. And that is a good way to do that, in my opinion, because it shows that, okay, the doll is spying on Coraline. It disappears when she goes to the other world. And it's just a big aspect in that regard. And to the average viewer, they can make that connection. When you're adapting something, when you're telling a story, especially in a visual medium, you don't want to treat your audience like they're idiots. You don't want to have to walk them through it, but they are going to have questions. And so you have to find a way to answer those questions. And using the doll to spy on Coraline and inform the other mother on her building this fantastical world is a really important element that that answers the audience's question of why is the other mother like this? Why is the world like this? That changes everything. And it helps with like the wonders because, like I said, in the book, the wonders aren't really a thing. You have Miss Spink and Forcible, they are in the book, and, you know, they have their little like moment of like stage performance, but you don't really have the garden that the dad is helping out in, and you don't have the mouse circus. You have the character Bobinski, just as Mr. Bobo in the book, but you don't ever really see the mouse circus. You go in there, but you don't experience the mouse circus itself. You only get the evil rats. And to really push the drastic difference between these two worlds in a movie, they had to push it to its limits. They had to make the normal world seem as bad as possible while the other world seemed as good as possible. And they do that, especially with the wonders, as well as the parents. So in the main world, her parents are really boring. She still kind of talks them up in the book. Like, she's like, they're all right. They're good parents, but, you know, they're kind of boring. In the movie, they make them boring as well as almost not exactly neglectful, but they kind of take that stance a little bit, making her kind of making their parents kind of neglectful, because that makes a drastic difference. You know, they kind of don't really care that she's doing whatever she wants. They're worried about their own thing, and, you know, they love her, but they're not going to do a whole lot together. Whereas in the other world, they're super about her. They like focus on her every second of every day. And then you have the wonders, where in the real world, it kind of is like it's in the past, or like the garden isn't really built up yet, or the mouse circus, you can't see it. And then in the movie, you have the mouse circus, which is very fantastical. You have the garden, which is all bright and colorful and taken care of. You have Miss Spink and Forcible putting on this wonderful show with all their dogs. And that is just so much more of a drastic difference. And when you're doing a visual medium, you want to make it that drastic, because otherwise it's like, well, it's kind of better, but these people seem kind of weird. So to have that drastic side of things in the movie rather than the book, it lets them really focus on, hey, this world, despite its flaws, like the creepy button eyes, you could want to live here compared to your old world. And that, for a movie adaptation, is good to have, because it entices the character as well as the viewer a lot more, because the viewer can even be like, I mean, I would maybe join this world. And that is what you're trying to do. When you're reading it, you're reading from the point of the character. So you're kind of with the character rather than being an outsider watching the character. And it changes things. And like even some scenes have kind of been adapted. Like obviously the ghost children are in both, but they kind of explain it a little bit differently in the movie. To, you know, the doll kind of watched them and, you know, what they all looked like. And, you know, one of them is related to the owner of the flat, which, you know, just adds to everything. And you also have like, there's like a scene in the book that's a bit darker than in the movie. So when Coraline is having to look for the ghost eyes and everything, so in the movie, when she sees her dad, he's like riding the mantis like chopper machine, and he sacrifices and, you know, gives her the ball. Whereas in the book, he's like this giant slug creature that is trying to kill her in like a basement, because the other mother told her that that's where she could find one of the ghost eyes, as like a hint. And during that scene, the cat rips out the dad's eyes, and it just seems a bit more darker and gruesome in the book. And in the movie, they kind of change it. The dad, like, he's kind of more bloated and everything, kind of nodding towards the book, but not as drastically as the book takes it. And instead of ripping out the dad's eyes, they use it as a way for Coraline to be really smart and make her way out of the world. And that's to rip out the other mother's eyes, the beldam. And I like them twisting it around because the book tells it in a way and it makes sense for the book. And then the movie tells it in the way the movie does, and it makes sense for the movie. And that's the last thing we're going to talk about as well, is both worlds. The book and movie are both really good in their own rights. And I think they're done just right for each medium. I don't know if I would want a complete novelization of the way the movie does it, but I wouldn't want a movie version exactly the way the book does it, because they're different. They take their own creative liberties and tell basically the same story with just slight differences between them. And that's something adaptations have to focus on a lot. I think a lot of people tend to kind of complain about adaptations, saying, the aspects of this I want like this. But when you're doing an adaptation, first off, it shouldn't be one for one anyways, because if it's going to be one for one, just take the original thing anyways. But different mediums require different attention. Movies are obviously very visual. You have to think a lot about, okay, what's going into what the audience is seeing? What does the character feel and how do they express that in a visual sense? In a book, the character talks about their feelings internally, much like how a person would. And, you can read it like that, but you can't witness it like that, because it's not how you experience it's not how you experience your own stories in real life. You may think something, but you don't know what someone else is thinking. And that's just something you have to keep different. A video game is going to have aspects where you are a part of the story, much like real life. But those parts of the video game where you're experiencing something is not going to adapt to a movie or video game usually very well, because you're not in the movie. And it just causes adaptations to be a little iffy when you're trying to move them over. I think the best format to try and transfer things is a book to a movie, because usually a book kind of has everything laid out and you're figuring out the visuals for the movie aspect of it. But sometimes you still have to change around the story, because once again, although a story may work for a book and how it's laid out, you're gonna have to change some things for a movie because they may not work in a visual sense. You may have to change how some scenes happen to, make sure continuity is there. If a character is going into a location with a purpose, you may want them to stay there and get several things done rather than going back to do something else and being like, oh, I have to go back in here. In a movie or like a play, there has to be reasons that a character is doing that, much like in real life. Typically in real life, sometimes we'll go back and forth, but you get annoyed with yourself because, oh, I just went in this room, but I need to go do something again. I went back, I need to do something again. And that's really annoying. And to witness that, the audience feels that and they get annoyed because they know what that experience is like. And if you're intentionally doing that, that's great. It's going to work for the adaptation that you're trying. But most of the time, you don't want to do that because the audience is feeling what the character is feeling. In a book, you can do that because the character is learning more information as they're going along. You're learning new information as you go along. A lot of times in a visual medium, you're learning information at the same time as the character, but a lot of times faster than the character because of the way the movie is portrayed. And just having those differences allows things to be their own thing. And I think Coraline does that really well. There's a lot of similar aspects to everything. And, maybe one person will prefer the movie, one will prefer the book, or vice versa. But they are both their own world. They're both good. And I think it's what makes Coraline so great and leaves you easily entertained. So that's it for talking about Coraline. Hopefully you enjoyed. Speaking of enjoyment, let's talk about the rating of Coraline. If you don't know our easily entertained rating system, we have garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day, every day. And I'm going to put Coraline, I would say, at an all day, every day. Like I said at the beginning, it's kind of one of my favorites. I think it's incredibly well done. Its story is very unique, and there's not a whole lot wrong with it. I think it's a pretty fantastic movie, so I'll put it at an all day, every day. And before we go, we of course have our question of the week, and this is more based on the movie version of Coraline, and that is, what wonder is your favorite in Coraline? Is it the mouse circus? Is it the garden? Is it the singing dad? Is it Miss Spink and Forcible's performance? And personally, I would have to go probably with the garden. I think the design of the garden, like how they kind of put it as Coraline's face, is very interesting. I like the plants that all kind of come alive. And then later, when it kind of turns dark, it manages to make that vibrant aspect of everything kind of menacing, and I really like that aspect. So that is our question of the week. What wonder is your favorite in Coraline? Be sure to let us know in comments on Spotify, Instagram, wherever. Just let us know. And if you haven't already, follow or subscribe so you can be notified of the latest episodes when they come out. Give our Instagram and TikToks a follow for more entertainment content, and we'll see you next time. Bye. You have been entertained.